Okay. David, it's great to sit together and review some things of your life, and particularly why you choose and eventually become a criminologist, a psychological criminologist.
Psychological criminologist.
And so perhaps what we should do is start when you were in high school and when you made eventually a decision to go to university. Tell me what happened that kind of made you choose that step.
Well, I went to a grammar school in the north of England, and it was a fairly poor school, and we were fairly poor, but I went to see the careers master and said, did he think we could get into Cambridge? And he said he thought we could. So we applied to Cambridge. I was doing science at the time, and I was good at maths, and I applied for science into Cambridge, and I got in. I was very happy with that, and it really opened my eyes. I developed a lot at Cambridge. It was a great system. I was always interested in psychology, and I always intended to do it, although I was doing physics and psychology. But I was always really interested, so I was very happy to eventually graduate in psychology and then stay on to do a PhD. So that was good.
What was, you know, since science, of course, was pretty broad, I presume, as it was taught at Cambridge, what made you choose to psychology?
Well, I always intended to, really. As I say, I was always interested in psychology. When I was 16, I went to the local library and got out lots of books by people like Freud and Eysenck, and read them all voraciously, and I got really interested in psychology, so I intended to do it.
No, psychology, of course, is a very broad field. Do you remember at that time what were the kind of issues that kind of preoccupied you? You know, because I presume they're very different than what they were now.
Well, yes, 30 years ago. Well, it was experimental psychology.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the problem in Cambridge, is it was a very narrowly experimental course. So what I was doing really was a lot of human learning and perception and similar sorts of things. My PhD was on human learning, on how easily people learn. I remember the theory I was trying to test, and that was that if you can't remember something, either there's a partial memory trace left or there's no memory trace left. It was all or none learning versus partial learning, and
right.
that was the substance of the PhD.
No, the Cambridge method of teaching is partly through lectures, isn't it? And then one has professors or lecturers, you know, who teach on a one-to-one basis.
Oh, yes, that was the great thing about Cambridge. I think one-to-one with a brilliant person was fantastic. And especially in psychology, I was supervised by Alan Watson, who never published anything, I might add, but he was a brilliant man. And to meet with him once a week, and I would have written an essay, and he would go through the essay, and he would say, how does this follow from that, and you know, what do you mean by this argument? It really tremendously develops you. It's very challenging, and you develop in leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
I think that one-to-one teaching system is tremendous.
Yeah. Now, in this country, undergraduates and also graduate students get part of the kind of practical experience, particularly you know, collecting data, analyzing things and so on, by becoming a research assistant. Was that already in your time there?
No, the system was when you did a PhD, you did your own project.
Yeah.
Basically, you formulated the problem, you collected the data, you analysed the data, you wrote it up, and to a large extent it's still the system now. So the real model is of the lone investigator, the one investigator. When I did my PhD, I did 10 experiments. They were all psychological experiments, and in a way one followed from the last. I mean, I did an experiment that solved one problem, then it raised a number of other problems, so then you do the next experiment.
Right.
So it was all a logical series of experiments, really.
Now, once you got your PhD, you stayed on at Cambridge, isn't it?
Yes, well, I was getting fed up with psychology, really, and I think I was looking to move more into the social area.
Yeah.
I was interested in sociology, and so when I was finishing my PhD, I was offered various jobs of teaching in universities in psychology, but it suited me to stay in Cambridge, and I saw an advertisement to work with Donald West on the longitudinal study.
The psychiatrist.
Yeah. Yes, and I knew enough about longitudinal studies to know that they were unusual and interesting, and it was on delinquency, and so it sounded interesting. So I joined it. I was selected largely because I had learned to write Fortran programs when I was doing my PhD, so I had some computer and statistical skills. As I said, I was always good at maths. And so that was why I was selected. I knew nothing about criminology, but I joined the study and worked hard at it, analysing the data.
How long was the study on the way? This is the Cambridge study.
The Cambridge study, yes.
Delinquent development in Camberwell, London, isn't it?
That's right, yes. Yes, it started in 1961 and I joined it in 1969, so it had been going for 8 years.
Yeah.
And the boys had started at age 8 and they were now age 16 when I joined it.
What was it like to, at that initial stage, to actually look at data? I mean, it was limited longitudinal data, but it was there, I presume. What was it like for you to handle that data?
Well, it was very exciting. I mean, to a large extent, the data weren't computerized, really. I mean, a lot of it had been collected, but not well computerized. So actually, I kind of supervised a lot of the computerization of it. So that was advantageous because I always knew what the data was about. And I supervised that, really.
Now, am I right saying that it was a relatively small staff? I mean, was it you?
Yes. Well, when it was funded, I mean, it was funded by the Home Office on and off, but at the maximum there were three social workers who were interviewing the families and the boys, and then there were 2 psychologists who were working on it, and there was Donald West as the director of it. Right. So I was one of the psychologists, but then in the 1970s the funding decreased and there were less people. There was never more than 6 at the most, and more likely 3 people working on it while it was funded, and then the funding from the Home Office stopped about 1978.
But before that happened, were you ever directly involved in the field data collection, or was it mostly on the data side?
Yeah, I was on the data side. I mean, I would meet occasionally with the boys and young men who were in the study when they came to the offices in London, but I wasn't really involved in interviewing at all. I was only involved in the analysis. Yeah.
Now, I presume you must have learned a great deal in that period about, how to handle all this information. Was that mostly kind of self-discovery, or were they...
Well, I think so, yeah, mostly self-discovery, yes. I mean, I had some training in statistics in the 1960s and in computing, but it was mostly self-discovery, really. I think I could have done with going through more developmental social psychology training than I went through, really.
Now, some people here in this country would have taken a postdoc training. Did that exist at all at that time?
Very rare, very rare, really. As I say, at that time you could easily get a university lecturing job after the PhD. So that was what I was thinking of doing, but then I instead worked full-time on this research project.
But how was the transition, actually, getting into the lectureship?
Well, it was not difficult to get into a lectureship. I was offered lectureships, but I turned them down.
But eventually you joined the staff on the Institute of Criminology.
That's right.
So how did that take place?
Well, a job was advertised in psychology. I mean, I think it was really because Nigel Walker was appointed as professor in 1973. I think he was he believed more in the value of psychology as applied to criminology. So he created a job for a psychologist working in the Institute of Criminology, and I got that job in 1974. Yeah. So after I worked for 5 years on working on the grant, and then from 1974 I had a pretty permanent university job. Yeah,
and that meant then also starting to teach?
Well, yes. Well, I had taught a bit before then, but I taught, and then 1975 to 1978 I was director of the MPhil course, so I was preparing teaching, doing a lot of administration up to 1978, really. I think the turning point was in 1978-79. I had a sabbatical in Canada, in Ottawa, working for the Solicitor General. I enjoyed that, and that enabled me to catch up a lot. I was a bit behind, really, with things. And I know in that year, I think I wrote 15 articles and managed to catch up. And also during that year, I met a lot of people in North America. I travelled quite a bit. I went to my first American Society of Criminology meeting in Dallas in 1978. And that was a turning point, really, because I was able to step back, catch up, meet people. And then another real step forward was in 1981 when I was a visiting fellow at the National Institute of Justice, which again was a really good thing to do. I enjoyed working closely with Pat Langan and Larry Greenfeld, and I enjoyed very much getting together with Al Blumstein, who became a great influence on me. And it was great to come and find out what was going on in the US, particularly on the criminal career research.
Now, this initial step to Ottawa, how did people get to know you in the, before they even invited you? I mean,
Oh, well, it was really Irving Waller. I mean, I knew Irving as a PhD student at Cambridge. He was an exact contemporary of me, and he was Director General of Research in the Solicitor General of Canada, and I intimated to him that I would like to have a sabbatical year, and he said he could find me a job out there working on the juvenile justice legislation. But he also said that while that was my official job, he was quite happy for me to do lots of my own thing as well.
Yes.
So it was a very happy year, really.
One of the remarkable things about your career is indeed that it spans British and North American criminology and related fields in a quite intense manner. So when you went to Canada and then later to Washington, can you tell me what were the kind of impressions you had of criminology as it was practiced in North America? Well,
certainly criminology in the US was much more quantitative than in England, and I felt that there were many high-quality people. I mean, particularly Al Blumstein, as I said. Al Rees also, very stimulating, intelligent person, very competent, interesting ideas, and it was good to meet these people, really. And of course, Marvin Wolfgang, I knew, was a great pioneer, and I had a lot of respect for all the American researchers. I thought that there was a critical mass of really high-quality researchers of the kind we didn't have in England, really. So I was more motivated to come to the US, to have more contacts with them, and to learn from them, really.
No, as you said, excellent people already at that time, doing really brilliant work. But the type of questions that were addressed at that time here in North America, were they vastly different than the questions addressed in, say, the UK?
I think so, yes. But, I mean, for example, Marvin's book on delinquency in a birth cohort was really perhaps the most influential book of the 1970s. And that was very much focused, and then it was followed in a way by Al Blumstein's work on criminal career research. And I think the focus in England wasn't really on criminal career research. It was really more on, actually more on system things. I think.
Can you give an example?
Well, there were a lot of research in England on the police and the courts and the prisons, and really very little. It's still true today. Very little in the way of fundamental research on the causes of crime.
Right.
And so, it's still true today. If you look at the contents of the journal Criminology, a lot of it's to do with causes of crime. We don't have much research of that sort funded in England, sad to say. Most of the English research is really criminal justice system research. So in a way, again, it was much more opportunities in the US.
I mean, the way that your own contribution to American criminology has played is through the very extensive analysis and workups you've done on the Cambridge study.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, it has been very influential in this country. But how did you see the interplay?
Well, if I can backtrack, I think another turning point really was my chapter in the first volume of Crime and Justice, which was on longitudinal studies in crime and delinquency. Now, when I was asked to do that, I think they wanted a chapter on criminal career research, but I wrote them a chapter about longitudinal studies, which tells you the difference between England and the US at that time. And I think, in a way, the influence of the Cambridge study was because I could address lots of the important criminal career questions using the Cambridge study, because actually the data was much more extensive than in any other American study at that time, I think.
That is surprising, isn't it? Because in a way, you think that those studies could have been done earlier in this country, but they weren't. That's what.
No, I mean, there were wonderful pioneers in the US, like Joan McCord, Lee Robbins, clearly, and the Glucks actually were great pioneers and careful researchers. But they didn't really address the criminal career questions, which were really very salient and important, particularly in the 1980s.
Well, and also the regular assessments that
we had
a hallmark of the Cambridge study. Now, let's go back for a moment to the Cambridge study. You continue to be involved, obviously, and you're in charge of the Cambridge study now. But the planning of the regular follow-ups and the kind of types of follow-ups was eventually shared. I mean,
yes, well, I started. Yes, I mean, the first one that I really was heavily involved with was the 18-year assessment, because when I joined, the 16-year assessment was in progress. So I was very much involved with the age 18 assessment and really all the others. And then I did the 32-year assessment on my own, really, because Donald had retired by then. And then in the 1990s, I followed them up in criminal records. So I took it over, really, in the early 1980s.
Right. But also, the first, you were already involved, going back in time once more, with the first book on the study.
Well, no, not really. No,
the
first book, the second book. The first book was Present Conduct and Future Delinquency.
Yeah.
That was just about completed when I joined. But I played a major part, I think, in writing the second book on who becomes delinquent, and the third one on the delinquent way of life. Should have written another one or two.
Well, it's never too late.
That's it.
But that study has been an incredible resource in terms of being able to address questions, isn't it?
I think so, yes.
And can you give me an example of what you consider an article that really opened up things?
Well, I think an interesting article that I completed, which actually has hardly ever been cited, is the article on the effects of labelling in 1977. And I think that was interesting because I really took labelling theory seriously, and I tried to test it empirically. And the results were fairly clear-cut in showing that people did commit more offences after being convicted, after being officially labelled. And I thought it was a good paper, but the problem was the labelling theorists were anti-empirical, so they ignored it. And then the empirical people were kind of anti-labelling theory, so they ignored it. And also it was in the British Journal of Criminology, which Americans ignored anyway. So I thought that was a good paper, which was largely ignored, I'm sorry to say.
Now, fortunately, many of the other articles were not ignored, of course. But do you have some idea which articles received most prominence of that particular study?
From the study, no, I think it was the book, Who Becomes Delinquent, is the most cited item from the study, yes, definitely. I know that because of my citation analysis.
Yes, very good, yeah. Well, certainly a hallmark, and kind of has set the standards, really, in the field. Now, you tell me a little bit more about how you experienced your career as it kind of unfolded with the Cambridge study going on, your increasing contact in North America. What kind of things?
Well, then,
what were the turning points?
Very interesting things happened in the 1980s. As I say, because of Crime and Justice, because of my time at the National Institute of Justice, I got to know key people like Al Blumstein and others, and Lloyd Olin was another, of course. And then in the 1980s, I was involved in the Criminal Career Panel of NAS, which was very good, which you were involved in as well. And that was a wonderful experience, really, because the panel, we really felt as though we were doing something tremendously exciting, defining the field, in a way, pushing back the frontiers, having a new paradigm. I thought the Criminal Career Panel was absolutely terrific, and I learned a lot, and it was great. Al ran it in a wonderful way, I felt. So I felt that was a wonderful thing to be involved in. And then simultaneously, I got involved with the Macarthur Foundation initiatives, because I was asked to review some proposals that they had had for longitudinal research, and then Lloyd Olin and I and Jim Wilson basically wrote the book Understanding and Controlling Crime, which recommended a multiple cohort accelerated longitudinal design to the Macarthur Foundation, and they vaguely liked that. So then we had some more years of... then NIJ joined in with them in about 1987, and there was 3 years of funding for more planning work on that NIJ Macarthur initiative, which was interesting.
This is for the later Chicago study.
Yes, exactly. Yes, well, I bailed out at the end of 1989 because I thought I'd had about 6 or 7 years of planning by then, and we produced a second book on human development and criminal behaviour, which again elaborated the multiple cohort design. And I thought, well, we've said this is what you should do, and I think it's time to do it, really. So I was happy to move on. But it was all those kind of initiatives. Then there's the Ojjdp initiatives as well. See, lots of things came together. All the agencies decided they needed longitudinal research in the 1980s, and it was a great time. Ojjdp decided they wanted to mount some longitudinal studies. As you know, you and I applied for the Pittsburgh study. We were successful in this competition, and along with Terry Thornbury from Rochester and David Heisinger from Denver. So the 3 studies began in 1987. That was exciting, and I think all 3 studies have been great studies and very interesting studies in the last 10 years, really. So I think lots of exciting things happened in the 1980s, and I think Gottfredson and Hershey argued that the criminal career longitudinal paradigm was kind of dominant. I think that was an exaggeration, but it was certainly very important, and that was great because all kinds of exciting things were happening.
Now, what is interesting about your career is that, although of course you write articles sometimes by yourself, you have been writing lots of articles with other people, and your collaboration really is kind of a hallmark of your career. Tell me a little bit more about the kind of collaborations that you looked for.
Oh, I think I'm always looking for collaborations because I learn so much from them. Yeah. I think it's great to collaborate with people like yourself, and the Pittsburgh study. It's a great privilege to work on it, and I collaborate with lots of different people. I mean, at the moment I'm collaborating with Adrian Rain on the Mauritius study. Again, I'm learning about psychophysiological measures, and also measures at age 3, which I've never known before. And I collaborated with Israel Colvin on the Newcastle 1000 Families study, collaborated with Marc Leblanc on the Montreal follow-up study. Every time I see a new study, I learn something new and get some new ideas, and each study has new possibilities. I mean, for example, I was doing some analyses of the Seattle Social Development Project with David Hawkins and trying to compare self-reported and official offending at different ages. Every study's got its own unique features, and it's really great to collaborate because you have much more scope for doing things. It's you can only do so much on your own, really.
Yeah, right.
And outside the longitudinal field, as I say, I can probably claim to have collaborated on more longitudinal studies than anyone else, but on different studies. But outside that field, I've had a lot of collaboration. For example, with Pat Langan of BJS on following up measures of victim survey, measures of crime, and police statistics, and convictions, and probability of custody, sentence length, time served. I mean, again, I've learned a lot about all the American data sets, and learned a lot about English statistics, English crime rates versus American crime rates. It's all been very illuminating. I enjoy collaborating, I must say. But,
well, I think it's
but I'm careful in a way. I only collaborate with real nice people. I think you have to choose.
Hassles,
you have to choose your collaborators carefully. Make sure they're really nice people.
But it's also a wonderful way of trying to understand what are the most optimal ways that data can be collected.
Well,
what
and also,
kind of things are really crucial.
Yeah, different people have different perspectives and different skills, different knowledge, and collaborating with Al Blumstein in the 80s was great because he had all these real ideas about what's the key issues in criminal career research. So all my collaborations have been really good. I enjoyed the collaboration with Al Rees, although it went on for years and years on co-offending. But I think
it was a long article. Yes,
well, it was
it made an article that took a long time.
Well, Al Rees is the kind of person who every time you do one analysis, he thinks of 5 more to do. So it's difficult to come to closure. But I really enjoyed it because it was an interesting article. I think it was a new thing, so that was good. All the collaborations have been good, really.
Now, there are, of course, a good number of articles that you did write by yourself, and you mentioned already the article on longitudinal studies in crime and justice. You then collaborated, you actually produced quite a good number of chapters for subsequent volumes in that series.
That's right.
You're probably one of the most published
along with Larry
authors.
Sherman, I think. I think Larry Sherman and I probably dead heating for the most chapters in crime and justice.
But that's a very influential series, I think,
absolutely,
because in a way it allows people to take a view of major issues and have space to kind of
Indeed. No, I think it's a great series, a great idea, state-of-the-art reviews, very high quality. I think it's wonderful, and I'm very happy to have contributed a number of chapters on different topics.
But do you have some kind of idea what kind of topics you would like to treat in it if the series continues? Are there things that you would love to...
Well, I think you've cornered the market in developmental criminology, haven't you?
Well, I'm sorry for that. I should have left it to you. But let me tell you, you were very preoccupied with other things.
Well, I think my interest really has been mainly methodological.
Yeah.
I think if one should criticise me, I haven't done enough on theory probably, but it would be interesting to try and write a state-of-the-art theoretical chapter in a way.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because indeed criminology has a bit of a tension. There are different theories, there are heavy emphasis on the evaluation of the theories, refining them, combining them, and so on. What do you see as a future for theory in
well, I think the theories need to be more testable. In a way, there's an interesting contrast between, at the one end, you have a very mathematical theory, like Al Blumstein was really testing, lambda, with formulae, what influences lambda.
This is the rate of offending.
Yes, exactly, and other things. And that's a kind of a micro theory, which is testable, but really you're only talking about micro things. But then at the other end, you have, massive theories, which are really more like diagrams, family factors influence peer, if you have some kind of rejection from your family, that throws you into the company of peers, that makes you more likely to be delinquent. I mean, those theories are very difficult to test, really. I think there needs to be more middle-range theories. You need to move up from the simple mathematical theory with only 2 or 3 variables, and you need to move down from the grand theory and make it more testable. Somehow we need more testable theories, which we don't have at the moment, I feel.
Now, you're a member of the this research group on violence, the National Consortium on Violence in Pittsburgh. And one of their themes is to investigate development of offending, looking at situations that are relevant to violence. And the third part is, of course, the neighborhood and kind of ecological aspects of violence. Do you think theories really would be able to integrate these very diverse levels of problems?
Well, this is a challenge, I think. Historically, the people who were interested in neighbourhood influences generally ignored the individual difference factors, and certainly the biological factors, and vice versa. Historically, people who are interested in individual difference factors ignored neighbourhood. In a way, that's one of the strengths of the Chicago study, that they're trying to go from the neighbourhood to the individual, which is a good thing. But to try and develop theories that incorporate all these levels is a great challenge. But I do think in our longitudinal studies, we've largely ignored situational influences. I think there's a clear message there that we should be, our focus has been more on how does the, if you like, the antisocial personality develop, or how does the person with low inhibitions develop, how does, if you like, criminal potential develop. And we haven't really focused so much on how does criminal potential become manifest in criminal behaviour. So we should really be asking more questions about how, when offences happened, how did they happen, where did they happen, who was involved, who was the victim. These things are asked in some areas of criminology, in the situational areas, like, for example, the Ron Clark situational crime prevention approach. And I'd like to see more linkage, in a way, of the strengths of the longitudinal approach with the strengths of the situational approach or the neighbourhood approach. But all these things are great challenges. In a way, they're not things that one person can do easily. Perhaps they're things that you need big studies to do.
Yeah, and also not a single investigator will solve.
Well, that's right. Again, that's where you need collaborators, you see, because everyone has different strengths and knowledge in these different areas. Another
linkage that you have really brought to the field is the linkage between longitudinal studies and experimental studies. Perhaps you can kind of tell a little bit more about kind of how that type of connection, how you developed it and why you think it's important.
Well, I've always focused on method, and I've always advocated systematic observation and experiment. They are the basis of the scientific method. And I did some systematic observation studies on shoplifting, where we followed people through stores, and also...
You planted also things to be stolen.
Exactly. I did the lost letter studies, which were experimental observational studies, where we left money and letters on the street with different messages, and we investigated whether or not people stole them and what influenced that. And that's experimental criminology, which I think we need. So I'm a great believer in experiments. I like the randomized experiments in evaluating prevention and treatment methods. And also, of course, I'm a great believer in the longitudinal method, so it was natural to try and combine the two, and to recommend that we should try and combine the two, so that you get, each has sort of complementary strengths and problems. The longitudinal study has the strength of really tracing development through time, but a weakness of not really demonstrating